you wanted the best, you've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
I'm Chris Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. Who said that? Welcome to the show, my family and friends. We always see you guys. As always, our lady says it. That makes it official. Welcome to 16 years of the Chris Voss Show. 2,800 episodes. We're bringing you since 2009 because we had nothing better to do. We just love podcasting, and we love amazing guests that make the world smarter, that raise the world's IQs, if that's possible. I've been on Twitter, so I'm not sure. But raise some of the IQs of people who want to be smarter. Let's put it that way. Opinions expressed by guests on the podcast are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the host or the Chris Voss Show. Some guests of the show may be advertising on the podcast, but it is not an endorsement or review of any kind. We're going to get into it with another wonderful gentleman and his book. But in the meantime, we need to cajole you. The one thing we ask, we don't ask a lot for you. Just listen to the show and, share it maybe. But go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss for your family, friends, and relatives. Facebook.com/Chris Voss. LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss. And YouTube.com/Chris Voss. Today, our amazing author is Tom Hardin. He's going to be joining us for his book called Wired on Wall Street, The Rise and Fall of Tipper X, one of the FBI's most prolific informants. And you're going to be surprised as to who Tipper X is. We're going to get into it with him and find out more about what he does. But Tom Hardin helps organizations identify and close the blind spots that quietly push good people toward bad decisions. As a founder of Tipper X Advisors, he partners with Fortune Global 500 companies, boards of directors, financial institutions, law firms, business schools, and leadership teams to deliver keynotes, tailored workshops, and interactive courses, and advisory engagements in behavioral ethics, culture risk, and organizational conduct. Welcome to the show, Tom. How are you?
Great. Doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. Or should I call you Tipper?
Either one.
So give us your .coms. Where do you want people to find you on the interwebs?
Yeah, no, I'm at tipperx.com, TIPPERX.com. Just found out from the U.S. Patent Office that's trademark. So I believe I'm the only Tipper X on the interwebs. So you can find me there, my information.
Maybe you can take over Twitter because it's now X. So I think they're in violation of your copyright.
Right. Cease and desist for Elon.
Yeah, he needs a few of those. Anyway, give us a 30,000 overview. What's inside your book?
Yeah, so it's really my story as a young guy from Georgia, middle class family, going back to the 90s where I grew up and got into an Ivy League school and got working on Wall Street in the early 2000s into the hedge fund world of buying and trading and selling stocks. And I was set up really to succeed. Hedge funds are some of the most lucrative careers you can have. And Chris, I also became aware in the mid 2000s that insider trading was rampantly happening, buying or selling stocks on inside information. And I hate to say it, but I totally own it in the book that I ended up crossing that line, receiving 4 tips on trades that were illicit and inside and not public, and placed those trades. And my boss said, "This is amazing, but don't tell me how you're doing it," so we could talk about leadership there. And then the FBI's in my face 7 months after that 4th trade, but I'm happy to back up and fill in the gaps.
What do you think triggered it with the FBI?
So the FBI knew about, there was a woman that tipped me on 3 of the trades that was already a convicted felon. So she had a sealed conviction, and they looked at her again and knocked on her door as I researched the book. And they said, "You did this again. Who'd you tell?" And she said, "There was this young guy in New York, Tom Hardin." And they approached me. She had lunch with me one day in New York, and she said, "Tom, we made these illegal trades last year, right?" And I said, "Oh, we did." And so she was wired up and served me on a platter. So, yeah.
Wow. So you decided to is the thing that you decided to become an informant for Wall Street and wear a wire as well?
Yeah, that's right. So I was out 7 months after the 4th trade. I wasn't really thinking about it. It's the financial crisis in 2008, July, and I'm living in Manhattan as a great life up to that point, and dropped off some dry cleaning at 6:30 in the morning. And Chris, I heard somebody up behind me on the sidewalk say, are you Thomas Covey Hardin? And the last time I heard that was my mom back in Georgia and about to whip my butt. And it wasn't mom. It wasn't.
It's always that middle
mom.
name that makes you go, they use that.
Middle name, that's not good, especially in the Manhattan sidewalk. And
it's
turn
either
around
mom or the FBI.
Yeah, exactly. So people know, right? Write that one down. And it's, just like the movies, the wallets are out, the dark suits, FBI, come sit down with us. And we sat down at a fast food restaurant. And he was like, hey, man, we know about your Ford trades last year. And I remember Chris thinking, like, I made such small trades compared to everybody else. I was trying to rationalize it, and it doesn't matter. I made the decision to cheat, and they knew it. And they said, we think you could help us build some cases here on Wall Street around the financial crisis. And I was scared, Chris. They said, we were just down. They knew I was just down in Georgia visiting my baby nephew that last weekend for his baptism, and they knew his name, and he's 6 weeks old. And I thought, oh my gosh, my parents aren't going to like this. Just sort of, young guy still in touch with my parents. And I thought my wife's going to leave me. And we just got married, and she had no idea about my trades. And they said, you can help us build these cases, Tom. I said, should I talk to a lawyer? And the FBI said, we'll let you know when you can do that. So that's how they played the game there, and it's crazy.
What's that feel like? We talk a lot about things on the show, but a lot of people don't get to experience this. What does it feel like do you just have a pit of your stomach just drops when?
Exactly right. So it's on the street, and Chris, I knew why they were there subconsciously, and they're stopping me and know my name, and I thought, damn, this is those trades, right? Like it just hit me subconsciously.
It went right back to that, huh?
Yeah, like it had been 7 or 8 months, but it was definitely lingering there, and then your stomach drops. I think in the book, my editor said I said my palms were sweaty and my heart was racing. He's like, Tom, you've written this 17 times. I'm like, this is all I remember. I sat down with the FBI, and it was sort of like the Charlie Brown teacher, the want, like you kind of zone in and out. You don't hear it. And then you come back, and it was a male and female agent. And the male was playing the sort of scaring me, and the female put her hand on my hand, and I came to, and Chris, you like this? She said, Tom, the FBI is here for you when you're ready to turn your life around. And I said, you know what? I'm ready.
Yeah. And you were lucky that they weren't, they were in a mood to make you an informant instead of just throwing you against the wall. So,
yeah. And I'm lucky they stopped me after 4 trades, to be honest, because I would have kept doing it. My boss was looking the other way, and that's sort of willfully blind to what I was doing as the young professional. And I look, as I wrote the book, I'm like, thank God they stopped me. I didn't think about that at the time at the Wendy's there, but I thought about that now.
Yeah. I was going to make the joke. this is why you always, if you're going to commit crimes, do a lot of them. That way you can't remember which one the FBI is there for, and you won't look as guilty. It'll be like, well, which one? Don't do that.
That's right. Yeah, no, it's on my 4 trades. I personally made $46,000. So you think about throwing your career away at 29. So in the book, I'm sure people will be shocked by that. Like, why didn't this guy try to make millions? Well, then, a bad person tries to make millions. A regular guy, Tom, just tries to make a little bit and play along. So that's so much of the psychology. In a lot of cases, a lot of white collar crime, it's these small amounts in terms of your career.
And that's a really important point. You have to look at, what do I have to lose? I owned a mortgage company for 20 years. I was never, you'd make a good set of bank off of one mortgage loan, but was it worth throwing away your career? Was it worth, being investigated for mortgage fraud, having a felony or a misdemeanor, even criminal record, and I would have loan officers that work for me. And they're like, hey, Chris, and then part of where this conversation would come up, the mortgage company next to us was literally using the windows to forge the signatures. So they hold it up the window against the signature with the loan application or whatever, and they would be sitting there forging it. And I remember there was one time where I was interviewing a mortgage loan processor to come to work for us. And I hired her, and the first thing she said when she went to the office where the processors were is she goes, "Where's the light table?" And I go, "What do you mean the light table?" She goes, "The light table so, we can sign the customer's paperwork." And I go, "Yeah, we don't do that here. We're a legit company. I'm not going to jail. And if you want to go to jail, you can go someplace else to do it. Because I'm not going to jail."
Yeah, that's good. You had that healthy. I always tell people, have that healthy paranoia. Never think it couldn't be you. Like people might read the book and think, I wouldn't be this guy, Tom. And that's like, actually have a healthy paranoia in the right situation with the right pressure and temptation. Like we could do anything. And so I hope people see that when they read it.
Yeah. And they would have excuses. They're like, well, what if we, there's a form we need to have signed by the customer. I'm like, email it to them. You wait for it to mail them back, or we'll send a driver out to the house to have the paperwork signed. We're not forging signatures here, man. And that was a lot of the problem with a lot of when the mortgage crisis hit the wall. But they would always see the guy in the window next to us. And he eventually got banned by all the mortgage. He eventually got caught. He lost his business and he was banned. And I don't know if he was criminally held, but most of the mortgage companies went, yeah, we know what this dude's up to. Yeah. And I would sit down with my loan officers and I'd be like, look, this deal, you're probably going to make like $2,000 off this deal, maybe, right? Maybe tops 1,500, 1,000, whatever. You're going to make some commission off this deal. Is it worth cheating just to make $2,000 and you lose the $2,000 times 10 or 20 deals a month you do times the next 5 years or 10 years or however long? I owned a mortgage company for 20 years until 2008. And is it worth it? And, like you said, you probably created a whole lot of maybe attorney expenses and, issues with your life over, what was it, $46,000?
$46,000. And it's often a perceived immaterial amount. So that $2,000 is one of the top rationalizations. Sometimes a client will have me come speak to them because they've had an issue with an employee they can't talk about because of employment law. But it often comes back to two rationalizations. Number one is, well, it seemed like everybody was doing it. That's always a common thing. And number two is that immateriality. What I was doing was small and immaterial. And what I do is show that number or 2,000 or 46,000 as an iceberg underwater. And that's what you see above the water. But below the water, your reputation, your career, the opportunity cost of me like losing my career, all those future years of earning, like you're not really seeing that in the moment.
Yeah. You're just like, look the other way. Everyone does it. Just because everyone does it doesn't mean you should do it. And
that's
and it's not really about worrying about getting caught. It's just doing the right thing. And, part of it is if you do the right thing, hopefully everyone else will do the right thing, the golden rule. But, those people that, that's why we have a rule of law society, or we used to have one, I think. 2026, folks, if you're still watching this 10 years from now and from the burnout apocalypse. Anyway, I'm just joking. It's going to be 5 years from now. So, Tom, so you do this thing. And so Tipperex, was this your code name or something? Or is this your FBI name?
Yeah. So FBI approaches me that morning at the Wendy's, or the dry cleaner scares the crap out of me. And they said, hey, don't talk to a lawyer, but you can only tell your wife, Chris. And I violated that. I went to St. Patrick's Cathedral. I just became Catholic for marriage and wouldn't give a confession. And there was a long line of guys on Tuesday afternoon. I had gallows humor. How many hedge fund guys are in this line? And went to the priest and said, hey, you won't believe what happened this morning. And my penance was, hey, help the FBI. And, I should have talked to a lawyer, but talked to a priest. And I waited till Friday to tell my wife, how the heck am I going to do this? She was working at Lehman Brothers, if you remember those guys.
Oh, she's working at Lehman Brothers too. Wow.
So she's having a hell of a year. And now her husband is this, approached by the FBI. I waited till Friday, and Chris, I was having panic attacks and bed sweats, and she knows something's going on. I usually try to keep it, make her laugh. And it wasn't like that week. And Friday after work, young couple in New York City, we're in our 20s about to start a family. And I said, hey, I got to tell you something. And FBI Tuesday morning. And she was telling me last year when I was interviewing her for the book, she's just like, I remember you owned it, immediately saying you did it. And she said, she heard me and she said, can you say that again? I said, FBI Tuesday morning, insider trading, I did it. And she said, well, you didn't do anything to hurt me. And Chris, I researched for the book, 85% of marriages will end when a spouse brings in, a future felony. And so it was not easy, but when people read this book, they're certainly going to see I'm not the hero. She stayed with me through all this.
And another lesson from this is always marry someone who has a felony already.
That's right back into it.
Because then it's easier when I got another one. Oh, okay, well, we had one already. It's funny that this is, I don't know if funny is the right analogy, but comedian. But it's interesting that this is still happening. I grew up in the age of Ivan Biosky, Michael Milken, Greed is Good. The guys that Wall Street, the movie, is based upon. It's always funny every time I say the Greed is Good line. They always go, hey, it's from the movie. No, that's from Ivan Biosky. And
that's right.
The scandals and all the things that went on there. And the Greed is Good. I mean, it was a crazy thing. He gave that speech, I believe it was at a college. Probably.
Yes, I forget the name. Yeah, but you're right. That's what they took it.
And it's still a thing. It still goes on, and people will bend the rules, and you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? So what happens then? I mean, we want people to buy the book, but what are some of the key points, some of the experiences you go through?
Yeah, so Friday I tell my wife and she accepts it as well as she can. And Monday I have lunch with the FBI and I'm pretty naive and there's a small piece of metal on the table at lunch. I said, is that an extra BlackBerry battery? We still had BlackBerries then. And they must have thought this guy's a knucklehead. Like this is a body wire, like a recording device. You're going to have to wear this, Tom. And like usually you would have to wear a wire. Like you would have to say, am I going to wear a wire on a buddy that I tipped information to? Which one of the guys in these cases had to wear a wire on the best man at his wedding. And I didn't have to do that because a guy I tipped already wore a wire on me, and the woman that I mentioned had worn a wire on me. So I said, how do I help? And they said, if you bring us the worst actors in the industry, do you think you can do it? And so what I did, Chris, as my cover story for a meeting with the wire was I would get a meeting with the big hedge fund guy and just say, hey, I'm a young analyst. I'm probably out of work this year. It's 2008. I'm looking for work potentially, which is a good cover story. And then I'd say, by the way, how do you get your stock tips? How do you get your insider tips? But if you're just meeting me, Chris, and I'm like, how do you commit felonies? Like, you're not going to say anything.
Yeah, you're not going to be like, you just came in off the street. Sure, here's the whole operandus.
It was sloppy. And the FBI was always sitting next to me at a Starbucks because they wanted to make sure I wasn't sliding you a note saying, I'm wearing a wire. And then they would listen to the recording later and say, Tom, you're doing such a terrible job. You're so flummoxed. And I said, hey, guys, it's my first time doing this. There was no training at the ethics classes back in college, right? So,
yeah, there wasn't a college degree for that.
Yeah. There was no training at all. But eventually, what the FBI told me was to ask a question and say nothing. So like that negotiation technique of silence. And so I'd ask the question, say nothing. And eventually, it took about 3 meetings. And by the third meeting, the target would say just enough, I have a source here, or just a little bit. And the FBI would say, Tom, you're done here, on to the next one. So this went on for 2 years. And one guy was high up the FBI's list. He was onto me so early. 15 conversations, he would change the subject. He calls me on a Sunday night and he says, Tom, we need to have dinner tonight. We need to talk. And I called the FBI and said, this guy you want wants to have dinner. They met me at the train station in New York. I took the train out to Connecticut with the wire in my front pocket. He picks me up at the train station and he says, Tom, good to see you. I brought swim trunks for you. We're going swimming at my mother's house. Yeah, and The Sopranos was popular that summer. So that episode where I forgot the character, but they take him into out in the water and kill him. I was thinking, oh my God, and went to this guy's house and I excused myself, went to the restroom and took the wire out, put it in my jeans, put these swim trunks on. We go out to this pool. We get into the pool. He grabs a tennis ball. We're playing this awkward game of catch. He's pouring on. He's freaking me out. And he said, Tom, I have to ask you one question. You have to be truthful. I was going to give it up, Chris. I was so scared. I thought the FBI would understand. I said, what's your question? He said, Tom, have you been approached by the SEC, who's the regulator? And truthfully, I could say, no, not the SEC. He doesn't catch that nuance. He starts telling me everything because he saw I wasn't wearing a wire. Oh, wow. This guy was one of the worst actors. He was never charged by the FBI or the SEC.
Wow.
That was the scariest moment.
Yeah. Yeah, because, your life's on the line for $46,000.
That's right.
How do you process that? Do you kind of go like, what the hell? I'm now a slave. I don't want to say slave, but you're now conjoined permanently with the FBI, and you
property of the government,
other hoops, property of the U.S. government for 2 years, over $46,000. And I'm sure they don't compensate for these meetings right?
It was a pro bono side hustle, I guess. Yeah, so I'm still going to the office, and it's 2008, so we're getting slammed by the market. We're stock market in 75 years, and the banks are going under. And then at lunch, I'm getting in that Crown Vic with the tinted windows. I'm getting my smoothie at the lunch truck in New York and got in the back seat, and they said, here's your next target. Here's what we're going to do at Starbucks across the street at 4:30 after the market closed, and would do these meetings. And Chris, they never gave me any feedback. It was sort of stone-faced FBI agents, like, how am I doing? And I told my wife, this probably isn't going anywhere. I was just trying to stay positive. I thought, I had some crazy thoughts, like maybe I'll be a professional informant. Like maybe they're going to hire me to be an informant. That's not how it works.
Work for the FBI, like that one guy with the check writing guy. What was that movie with Tom?
Oh, Abagnale, right. Yeah. And he actually invented 90% of his story. There's a guy that busted him a few years ago for the whole thing. But yeah, so you should have him on and see if he'll talk about it. Yeah, 90% of that story was fake.
He's a liar, right? Being more of a liar? Are you sure?
Yeah. It's the Metacon. Exactly. So I was thinking that because that movie was out, the great movie. So I thought maybe I'll be like that guy, or maybe they're going to drop the charges. And then 2 years into it, they said, turn on the TV. There was 20 guys perp walked, and there was one name. So coming back to Tipper X, One name was not released that was right in the middle of all these Wall Street guys. And it was the youngest guy of all 80 people, Tipper X.
Wow.
And I called the FBI. I said, is that me? I knew it. I said, is that me? And they said, yes, you should talk to a lawyer now. So
you should talk to a lawyer now.
2 years into, yeah.
So
now. And so
you just put in 2 years to
so I called a lawyer. All I knew was about insider trading was Martha Stewart up to that point. So I called him, and he's probably the most expensive guy in Manhattan. I said, all right, thanks. And I'm pleading guilty anyways. I cooperated, so I'm not going to trial. And I talked to a lawyer. I said, hey, I'm Tipper X in these cases. And he's like, all right, man, you've been doing it 2 years. Who was your attorney before me? I said, you're the first I've spoken to. He said, Tom, you're supposed to hire me the first day they approach you. I said, Larry, it's my first time doing this. So
it's not like I've been doing this for 4 or 5 times.
No, first felony. Exactly.
First felony. Well, you learn that way when you do the later felonies, you know how to work your oath.
That's right.
But you weren't one of those 20 that got perp walked. So which end of the stick do you want to be in? But it's a hell of a lesson. Yeah. How much
it is,
if you don't mind me asking, I mean, because I want people to think about this, because I've had this conversation, like I said, a lot with loan officers or people in business.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm never willing to get, I think about building empires and building things that last a lot of years. In fact, my mortgage company is supposed to last a lifetime, but thanks 2008. And it's always that one thing, like you say, it's like, well, everyone's doing it. Well, there's all these Faustian bargains people are playing with themselves, and they don't realize what they're putting on the line sometimes. And a lot of times too, it's your word to yourself. Like the power of your word, the power of your integrity to yourself is paramount. Because if you're going to bullshit yourself, well, have fun with that. Yeah. So probably, how much would you say, you can give me an estimate if you want, or you don't have to disclose it, but how much would you say that $46,000 cost you in actual money, maybe hiring a new attorney and all that stuff?
And so the attorneys, it was a couple $100,000 in legal fees, but the real cost was my career. And so when I speak at a college every year at NYU, I have a professor friend that calculates this number of Tom's career that he threw away. And that number for the students to see is pretty shocking. And for me, he gets to like a number of 23 million if I had a 15-year career in hedge funds with ups and downs. Wow. And so he's like, Tom, why'd you do it for 46,000? And so for the young students to see that, they look at me like it makes no sense. There's no rational reason why a person would cross the line for such a small amount when you throw away your career like that. And that's the calculation. And I put that in the book just so people know, like, $23 million is what I threw away. And my kids were reading the book and they're like, Dad, wait, what? We'd be flying private. Like, oh, that's unfortunate what the situation was.
Well, it's an important lesson, and a lot of people don't get to experience this, or they don't write about it. So this is really cool that you got a chance to share with people and hopefully educate people on, greed is not good. Agreed. What's the old, there's an old saying they have at the Justice Department. We've had at least one or two people on from the Justice Department. Well, if you count the FBI and CIA more, but what's that old line from the Justice Department? The wheels of justice move exceedingly slow. Yes. Or no, the wheels of justice move slow, but grind exceedingly fine. And that tells you what you need to know. You can try and escape and run, and maybe things, you can get away with stuff. You see these guys who committed murder back before they had DNA, and 30 years later, 40 years, 50 years later, they get caught. And and then there's the guilt of living with it too. There's the guilt and shame of knowing you violated your own oath to yourself, your integrity, and everything else. So now you've created, you're out helping, share this with other people in the world. Tell us about what you're doing there at tipperx.com.
Yeah, so the FBI invited me to speak about this. So I was sentenced in 2015 to no prison because they arrested 81 guys and they gave me credit for 20 of those arrests. And so it wasn't clear, though, because there was Occupy Wall Street. If you remember that, it was like, down with the bankers and these protests in New York after the crisis. But the judge said, hey, you were the key informant. And I still took a felony, Chris, securities fraud.
Really?
And the FBI, I took a securities fraud and a conspiracy to commit securities fraud. So I'm actually one of the consequences, and I'm not complaining, I made these choices and brought it on myself, but I'm actually debanked in the country at the major bank. So I have to find credit unions where I can just have a checking account. And so that's
most and it impacts your travel worldwide too.
And it does, right? I have to search the country. So Japan and Australia are probably off limits for the Hardin family, unless I can get a expungement or something. But yeah, you have to check the countries, and the banking is a tough one. And so there's 20 million people in the country with felonies. So that's a tough one. But the FBI invited me to speak about this. So 2016, I got a call from that restricted number, and my wife's like, "What did you do now?" She stayed with me, and I said, "I don't know. Was I watching illegal movies or something?" And the FBI said, "Hey, can you come talk to the rookie agents, because you were the youngest guy we charged of the 80 people, and you're just a regular guy. And this is how we usually just stop regular guys. It's not Bernie Madoff. Usually it's a regular Tom Hardin from Georgia." And so I spoke at the FBI, and they said, "Hey, go make a lemonade and lemons out of this situation. Just speak to all these young professionals and students about it." And so I went on a pilgrimage to colleges in New York, and I didn't charge initially. Just said, "Hey, does this make sense to you guys?" And they understood those rationalizations and those lines. And then eventually companies just started hiring me to speak for their kind of ethics training every year. And it turned into 650 talks in 13 countries. And my publisher reached out last year and said, "Let's get this on the page and keep the momentum going to other industries outside of Wall Street," because it applies to anybody. And so that's what I do today. One of the topics in the book I came up with was this idea of the integrity gap, where we all think about our reputation. I was so consumed about what people thought of me. I'm being in the know of the information. And you mentioned that character, those sacrifices we make with ourselves, those lines that we cross. And that integrity gap is that distance between our character and our reputation. And all those rationalizations are in between. And so we want to try to close that gap. And so every company's focused on reputation management, but rarely thinking about what are my sort of unimpeachable values, and what is my character? What does it look like every day? And so that's when I try to espouse in my workshops and my keynotes.
I was a realtor for 6 years, and there was a company-wide, I think it was a local-wide thing there in Utah, and every year you had to go through, maybe it was 2 years, you had to go through an ethics training class. And I remember taking it. It was really insightful, but I remember some of the comments, some of the interesting things said from the participants that I was like, they're asking questions like, "Well, so if I disclose, if I betray my fiduciary duty to my client and, work out a deal between the other guy that's benefit to us, but not the best deal for my client, is it still okay?" And, that sort of thing. Yeah. And I've seen it all my life through business. I'm sure you see it now, especially in what you do. And, there needs to be more ethics training. I think more leaders need ethical training, because it's not only the word to what you promise other people and what you do and how people, is this a leader I can trust or not? But it's also the word to yourself. It's the power of yourself. I know that if I bullshit myself, I'm going to pay the price probably for it. It won't be today.
That's right.
But it'll be tomorrow with interest.
That's right.
So I think this is really
that's very well said. Mm-hmm. So and I'm speaking more leadership summits too, just on that point. Like, assuming we all want to do the right thing, how do we get our good people to be even better? And some of the best ethics programs I've seen is when they actually recognize an employee who turned down a large commercial opportunity because there was some corruption risk with it, and passed on the business. And then they, you want to highlight those people and say this individual did the right thing and turned down this business, and that was a great piece of business we could have had, but the corruption risk was too much. And so, highlighting the why behind the decision.
Yeah. And there's a million examples you can do with this. I mean, I had employees come to me and be like, "Hey, my wife takes my whole check. Can you give me a side check?" I remember, I think there was some sales loan officers that left us and processors left us when they found out that we wouldn't allow faking of signatures and different sketchy stuff in the mortgage business that end up causing, I think, 2008, kind of, there was a lot that went into that. But, we would lose sales. I mean, I remember one time a guy came up to me at a convention from another mortgage company. He goes, "Hey man, did you guys ever get paid from this loan officer who bought us 4 deals from you guys? He had your leads and he said he was going to pay you and take care of it." And I was like, "No, we never did." And so we looked into it. But, we lost money because we would be like, "Yeah, we're not doing illegal stuff." And we found out this particular employee had an alcohol problem. Of course, we kind of knew about that. It's always interesting, the people. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the particular alcohol. But, if you have someone who drinks Crown Royal on a regular basis, check on them.
Yeah.
There's something about that, especially if they really love Crown Royal. I don't know what that's about, but there's a consistency there I've found over the years. When you hire salespeople, they sometimes come with all sorts of substance issues.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
It's always that you're either bailing them out of jail or picking them up at the local bar or whatever. I got stories.
Always something. Yeah.
We need that line has to be held, because if your other employees see that you're willing to allow illicit stuff to take place, or even if it's questionable morality or questionable ethics, we've all seen cases where leaders or CEOs will say one thing through the PR drip output, we're a moral, ethical organization. Right. And they get caught.
The shareholder letter.
The shareholder letter of blue sky, wanka wanka. And then they'll sit there and, eventually employees will be like, he's full of shit. He doesn't live. Yep. He doesn't walk his talk. He doesn't live his thing. And people do want, they focus on leadership, and they want someone who's ethical, moral, and because they know that sometimes they may be on the docket for, getting fired, or, I've had situations where I have to, I've got two employees and I got to figure out which one's lying and which one's the problem. Yep. And so you do speaking, see some services here as well as speaking. Tell us about some of the other stuff you have.
Yeah. So speaking, and with the book, I'm going to roll out some courses just, on decision making. And, to your point, like I'm engaging more with leadership summits beyond just ethics training, because companies that bring me in, they're like, oh, we have a great tone at the top, Tom. We don't need you. Like, no. Tone at the top, like you were saying, is just the words. For me, culture is the behaviors employees believe will be rewarded. And that's where the gap is sometimes between that shareholder letter. That's always a great tone. It's always cookie cutter. But what are the behaviors people are seeing at desk next to them? And sometimes companies don't want to ask the questions that they may not want to know the answers to, because it reflects back on leadership. So that's also doing better surveys on the culture. Not do we have an ethical culture? That's a terrible question. Which of our 4 values are true and which are not, and in what way? You're going to get more granular data. So that's why I was encouraged to just to really be fully accountable. I was speaking at a European company last week, and their code of conduct that everybody signed had 10 questions to ask yourself if you're ever at that line. I said, can I rip this up? They said, please don't do that. They said, hey, if you're at that line, ask yourself one question: am I willing to be held accountable for this decision at the end of the day? And that's all you really got to ask yourself.
Am I willing to be accountable? Am I willing? There's a great line from the album by Rush called Roll the Bones. People are like, why is he bringing music into this? And there's a great line: we will count the costs, but we will count the cost, but we won't count the price when we evaluate stuff. Yeah. Like when we buy stuff, we'll be like, hey, I'll pay the price for that, but you won't count the cost of what that might be. And that's kind of speaks to what we're talking about here. A lot of people will be like, 46,000, maybe I might get a fine or something. I don't know. But usually we underestimate that cost, especially when we circumvent ethics, morals, and our own personal word to ourselves, the power of our word to ourselves. And, once you start down that slippery slope, it doesn't end, because like you said, you probably would have kept doing it if you hadn't been stopped. And probably thank God you were stopped early on. You didn't become the big fish that ended up on the 20 perp walk.
That's exactly right. I'm happy they stopped me, because I would have kept doing it. And I'm happy they invited me to speak about this years later and put me on this path of, eliminated lemons, because it's really meaningful, work for me just to get those emails from the young guys. Hey, I saw myself and you. I'll never forget this. So I'm hoping the book gets out there for more people like that.
And hopefully so too. As we wrap up the show, anything more you want to discuss or tease out about the work you're doing and the book, et cetera, we haven't covered?
Yeah, no, it's just, it's wired on Wall Street. It's out wherever books are sold. And I also want to just have people read it that may be going through something self-inflicted on their own. And you can see that I wrote in there, your scars can become your service. You can really accept responsibility. And really the hardest part, Chris, is to forgive yourself. And that's something that's ongoing for me. And you mentioned shame and the guilt. And the shame is, nobody needs the shame. The shame is, I'm a terrible person. Guilt is, maybe I'm a regular guy that did the wrong thing. And nobody should have to live with the shame. So I talk about that too.
And it's #1 new release in white collar crime, true accounts here on Amazon, folks. So check that out as well. That's right. And it comes out tomorrow, the February 26th. Yep. Wired on Wall Street. No, it's not a story about a Wall Street trader doing lots of coke and Adderall. It's FBI Wired.
Yeah. That's right.
That joke out there because the rest of the stories are probably that anyway. I've known some Wall Street people. Let's put it that way.
Oh, yes.
Did your wife? So with the Lehman Brothers? I mean, would your wife getting laid off? You really had a pile of stuff coming at you.
Yeah, she got laid off, and then the FBI approached me 2 months after she was laid off, and then she finally she was lucky she found a job before they went under, but she was holding down the fort the whole time, and my name became Tipper X on the front page of the Wall Street Journal 2 days after she went back to work after maternity leave. So you can imagine a young mother; it's always a very hectic time. First born back to work, and she's back to work showing pictures of the baby, and then 2 days later, her husband's name on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So as I interviewed, it was pretty surreal to interview my wife for my memoir last year. I said, what was it like for you, Sue? And she said, thanks for asking, because you never did, Tom. Like, wow, you're right. You're right.
Wow. Well, sometimes, you're in that mode of survival, and, you've got the guns trained on you, and, you're doing the best for yourself and your family. And so, it's important to think about that before you do these things. So I'm glad you're out here educating people on ethics and morals. I'm a big believer in it. I've lost probably, maybe $1 million over all the years of my companies going back to age 18. Probably, maybe it's not $1 million, maybe $500,000 or $250,000, maybe, I don't know. You'd have to stack up all the deals, but over 20 years, there was a lot of mortgage deals and a lot of conversations that I took a pass on. Sometimes I found out they were, in fact, no, it actually probably is that high. There was actually some Chinese investors who in Vegas helped me wanted me to start a mortgage company for them and work my CEO magic. And within 6 or 8 months of starting that, I found that they were trying to give illicit loans to their mothers and their family, and I quit and walked away because I'm the one who goes to jail.
Good.
I'm the broker, who's supposed to prevent it. And I said, no, I'm not doing that. And it was painful, and I lost a lot doing it. So probably, if you count losses too and what it's cost me in money, but it beats having a felony and going to jail.
You only get one reputation. You can always switch jobs. People always call me, should I blow the whistle? I'm like, hey, you know what? You get one reputation. And I've learned the hard way. It's very hard to rebuild that. I've tried to do it this work, and hopefully I can do this a lot longer in my Wall Street career, but you only get one. So protect that.
And you're giving back and helping other people see the light. So I think that's one of the most important things too. Thank you very much, Tom, for coming on the show. You give us your .coms one last time as we go out.
Sure. It's tipperx.com, TIPPERX.com. All my information's there.
Thank you very much for Tom for coming on. Order up his book wherever fine books are sold. Wired on Wall Street: The Rise and Fall of Tipper X, one of the FBI's most prolific informants. Thanks so much for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, YouTube.com/Chris Voss, and all those other crazy places on the internet. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you guys next time.
You've been listening to the most amazing, intelligent podcast ever made to improve your brain and your life. Warning, consuming too much of the Chris Voss Show podcast can lead to people thinking you're smarter, younger, and irresistible sexy. Consume in regularly moderated amounts. Consult a doctor for any resulting brain bleed.
That brain bleed line always gets